right, welcome back. We're diving in as we dig into the Bible, chapter 3 of Genesis. Everything's been looking good. Life is great. It's beautiful. The garden is awesome. It's got great food. And, Adam and Eve have a job to do for God. They're there to care for the garden, for the plants and the trees and the birds and the animals. And they're there to be caretakers for God. Life is good. Well, here's what happens, chapter 3. Now the serpent was more crafty than any other beast of the field that the Lord God had made. So there isn't really an explanation here. We learn later that the serpent is Satan himself, and he comes to deceive. That's the craftiness. But there isn't really an explanation for why he appears as a serpent. But he comes to this as a serpent. He comes to Adam and Eve, and here's what happens. He said to the woman, well, hold on. What do you mean he said to the woman? Well, because this is no ordinary serpent. Remember, this is Satan. So you have a serpent, snake slithering up and speaking. So it's unusual. We're not going to have conversations with snakes these days. Even if you are a Harry Potter fan, that's not likely to happen. Here's what he says. Did not actually say to you, you shall not eat of any tree in the garden? In other words, did he really tell you not to do that? I mean, come on. That couldn't be what he says. That's kind of what he's getting at. He's trying to plant the seed of doubt here. And the woman said to the serpent, we may eat of the fruit of the trees in the garden. But God said, you shall not eat the fruit of the tree that is in the midst of the garden, neither shall you touch it, lest you die. So the serpent is twisting things a little bit. So this is that craftiness going on here. Saying, well, God couldn't have possibly told you can't eat from the trees. That's outlandish. Why would God tell you something like that? And Eve, to her credit at this point, is pointing out the accuracy. Well, no, it's not quite that way. We're able to eat any of the trees, except one. There's a tree in the middle. She's talking about the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. That one we're supposed to leave alone. We're not even supposed to touch it. But the serpent said to the woman, verse 4, you will not surely die, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. Here's the interesting part. The serpent is telling the truth here, because we'll find out later. Is that what in fact happens? Do they die? Well, they spiritually die. We'll talk about that in a moment. They learn good from evil. So in that sense, they do become like God, but he's hinting, well, God doesn't want you to be like him. He's keeping the good stuff from you. You don't get to be as good as God because, he's keeping this knowledge away from you. The implication is untrue, but by the letter of what he's saying, he's speaking truthfully. He's just, again, crafty. He's manipulating the language in such a way to appear to suggest something untruthful, while by the letter of what he's saying remaining truthful. Kind of a strange way to look at that. Kind of an odd little bit here. So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, which it was, and that it was a delight to the eyes, again, which it was, and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, that's her perception. That was the kind of the seed that was planted by the serpent. She took of its fruit and ate it, and she also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate. Pause there for a second. Did you know up until this point that Adam was already there? I always find this to be interesting. You have this dialogue back and forth between Eve and the serpent, and Adam, her husband, is standing right there. He's not involved. He's not arguing. He's not supporting his wife. He's not countering any of the arguments of Satan. He's just there going along with things, maybe just to see how things end. The text doesn't tell us what he's doing. He's just there. He's present. I think he maybe he thinks he's supporting his wife. She's already eaten the fruit. Okay, I'll go with it. But instead, what I think he should have been doing is he should have been defending his wife. He should have backed her up so that the doubt attempted to being planted by Satan wouldn't take hold the way it does, and that she wouldn't eat the fruit. But instead, he eats it along with her when it's offered. And here's the result. Then the eyes of both were opened. Well, isn't that what the serpent said would happen? and they knew that they were naked. Remember before we talked about it in the previous episode that they were naked and unashamed. In other words, there was nothing they had to hide from each other. Sin has entered the world and there's something suddenly to hide. We feel ashamed. We look at our nakedness and we say, I got to cover that up. Because of sin, we look at our physical selves and say, that's not something we expose to others. And in this condition, that's appropriate. We ought not to, because sin influences the way we see one another. But this is where it starts. The open relationship that they had closes immediately. And they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves loincloths. And they heard the sound of the Lord walking in the garden in the cool of the day, and the man and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord God among the trees of the garden. They hear God coming. Perhaps this is normal. Perhaps he takes a walk with them on a regular basis, but this time something was different. The relationship had shifted between the two of them, and now the relationship they recognize has shifted between them and God. They know the difference between good and evil, and they recognize that what they did was in fact evil. That's the basis by which they know what good and evil is, because they have seen and experienced and done evil. See, there is no knowledge of good and evil if all you have is an experience of good. You have the knowledge of good. That was already there. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil was there as a temptation, as a door open for them to have the experience of what evil is, simply by doing something that was forbidden by God. That introduces that knowledge. The fruit itself did nothing. It was transgressing God's command that gave the fruit the power to give them that knowledge, the experience of having done what was not of God's command. Verse 9, but the Lord God called to the man and said to him, where are you? And he, the man, said, I heard the sound of you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked and I hid myself. Here's God's response. I love this. He said, who told you that you were naked? In other words, how do you know this? How do you know that you're guilty of something? Have you eaten of the tree of which I commanded you not to eat? God's asking a question he knows the answer to. As parents, we ask those things of our kids all the time, don't we? Have you brushed your teeth? I already know you haven't. But I'm going to ask you because I want you to admit where you're at. Well, God asks this question. Man said, the woman whom you gave to be with me, she gave me the fruit of the tree and I ate it. Way to go, Adam. Way to stand up for yourself. Way to protect your wife. Nope, you immediately throw her under the bus. Way to go. Great job. And somehow he has the guts to blame God in the middle of this. The woman you gave me, well, she gave it to me. It's not my fault. Well, he doesn't totally say it's not his fault, but he kind of shifts the blame. Totally. That this quiet Adam, who is hanging back and not speaking up when he should, now he says, well, it was the woman, and the woman you gave me. I mean, I'm just here. Somebody just gave me fruit. I just ate what I was given. How's that my fault? Then the Lord said to the woman, what is this that you have done? The woman said, the serpent deceived me and I ate. Okay, so she's now passing the blame. The Lord said to the serpent, because you have done this, cursed are you above all livestock and above all beasts of the field. On your belly you shall go, and dust you shall eat all the days of your life. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. To the woman he said, I will surely multiply your pain in childbearing. In pain you shall bring forth children. Your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. The relationship has shifted. How husband and wife deal with each other, how childbirth will take place has shifted. And he continues, to Adam he said, because you have listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten of the tree. In other words, instead of you leading, you just listened. You didn't lead here. You didn't protect her. And have eaten of the tree of which I commanded you, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of you. In pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground. For out of it you were taken, for you are dust, and to dust you shall return. So he had work to do before. Now the work is going to be difficult. It's going to be hard to do. His labor is going to be difficult. Caring for the garden would no longer be easy, but God's not done yet. The man called his wife's name Eve because she was the mother of all living things. And the Lord God made for Adam and for his wife garments of skins and clothed them. This is one of those passages that flies right on by you, but what is God doing here? Where do the skins come from? Well, God has killed, he shed blood. An animal of some kind dies in order to shield the nakedness created by sin. Sound familiar? God later establishes a sacrificial system for the people of Israel where they offer sacrifices, where blood is shed in order that sins may be removed or covered over. Ultimately, Jesus sheds his blood to do that for us. But immediately here, it happens right away. And a physical covering is offered to Adam and Eve. Verse 22, then the Lord God said, behold, the man has become like one of us in knowing good and evil. See, Satan was right. He told the truth, but with craftiness intended to deceive. Kind of weird, huh? Now lest he reach out his hand and take also of the tree of life and eat and live forever. Therefore the Lord God sent him out of the Garden of Eden to work the ground from which he was taken. He drove out the man, and at the east of the Garden of Eden he placed a cherubim and a flaming sword that turned every way to guard the way from the tree of life. In other words, we were intended to live eternally with God. But in our sin, God has to, interestingly, I will suggest, out of mercy, take that away. God promises, back in the midst of those curses, he shall bruise your head, you shall bruise his heel. So there's a promise, a foreshadowing that one of the descendants of Adam and Eve would be Jesus, the Messiah, who would save us ultimately from the sin they just created. They're spiritually dead in this moment. So when God says, you will surely die that day, they spiritually die. Their relationship with him has died to some degree, but he is gracious. He immediately points to a promise, and he protects them from an eternity living in sin. But he has mercy in that he doesn't simply annihilate them and say, that's it. You've messed things up. You didn't listen. You're no longer my child. I mean, think about that. Your kids sin all the time. I don't have to tell you that. I've got 2 boys. I know what they do. They drive me crazy. But I love them, and I don't remove them from being my child. I have grace. Sometimes, because I'm not God, it's a challenge for me to have that grace, but I look to Jesus as my example and offer forgiveness. Even, and we notice here, was there any reason to offer forgiveness other than love? No, but that's what grace is. And right here in the midst of the fall and the violation of the first law, the only rule given, grace shows up. The gospel immediately shows up. So in this darkness, again, here comes the light. All right, we'll jump into chapter 4 next time. God bless.